So when you go into stillness or when you go into silence, if you're meditating or praying, that you are literally going into the depth of your being. And the depth of your being is silence. And then all of your perceptions and everything that's happening is on the surface of what you are. So like when you look inward, the mechanics of it are identical to going underwater. So if you're meditating, you're starting off at the surface, that's where you live, that's fine, and you have a particular buoyancy. So when you're at the surface, that's the little thought waves and stuff. This is all, everything happens at the same time. So that's why as you go into silence, your breath will quiet down, although it's not breath work. As you go into silence, your imagination will shut down, although it's not anything having to do with controlling the thoughts. As you go into silence, etc., these things will happen, although it's nothing to do with those things. So when you're at the surface of yourself, all the waves, it's just like the ocean. Like it's just like the ocean because it is water. You're going into water. It's just the water of the body, because of its electrical composition, is so deep in such a small space. That's a way to look at the human being. It's basically a body of water that has the depth that's like as vast as an ocean, but it's fractally done that way, using charge gradients and tubes. So when you go into that, the mechanics are exactly like the ocean. So just look at the ocean to understand it, and your thoughts are the tiny little waves, and then you have bigger swells, right, that the waves are on top of, that almost go under the other waves. Then you have even larger sets of swells that are like another big wave coming in together. Then you have swells that are like the size of a tide. So at the very surface are those tiny little things. It's the surface. All the waves have the same surface. So the deepest, biggest thoughts they're still just all surface. The tiniest ones are still all surface. But as you get quiet, you drop down a little bit. Once you drop down a couple feet, the only waves that you experience are the big ones. So you don't experience anything on the surface, but as the big waves goes by and you're down a little bit, like as if you're snorkeling, as you go by, you'll get yanked back and forth by that wave. That's the thing, that's the waves moving you at that depth. So when you look at the brain waves and stuff like that, it looks like you're going from alpha into theta, into lower things. In fact, the brain is a reflection of the surface at any point. The brain is reflecting everything that it can detect of the surface. So as you go into stillness, your brain will start reflecting like the surface of the depth that it's at, and you'll feel these big waves go back and forth. Those waves are there when you're at the surface, you can feel them, but when you go down into silence, the other waves are not influencing you. There's quietness between you and the other waves, and so then there's the mind can, your perception is overwhelmed with the bigger, deeper waves, so you can see them. And it's somewhat of a relaxation, it's somewhat of an exertion. How do you go down? How do you go down into that stuff? And it requires effort. You have to like stop breathing or figure out some way to breathe underwater in silence. Because the silence is silence. The silence shuts the breathing down. So as you quiet, as you go into silence, the breathing will shut down the same way that as if you go into water, the breathing shuts down. But shutting the breathing down doesn't put you into silence. Most people just do the techniques on how to shut the breathing down, and you can shut the breathing down and still be at the surface. But some breathing techniques will change your buoyancy or change your density so much that they'll tend to cause you to fall into silence. That's like what the Wim Hof method does that. The Wim Hof method just radically changes the buoyancy of the person's metabolism so that they sink into silence. Or some techniques put people into such crazy conditions that they'll drown and fall into silence. like if the effort's overwhelmed, right? What's the only way you can fall into silence if you don't want to drown and you don't want to go under? And that's just exhaustion. And that's what happens when people go from like materialism into water, into the first thing. It's like there's, you know, you don't have to drown. But I mean, imagine like a species of squirrels that can't comprehend water, so when they fall into water, this crazy thing happens to them. That's people's relationship with consciousness. Like everyone's pretty damn sure it exists, but it's without making that connection that you're talking about water for all these different phenomenon, it's really a comical sort of lunacy.